Today on Cyberwork, I spoke with Alex Sharpe, a 30-plus year veteran in cybersecurity, governance, and digital transformation. I was blown away by Alex's presentation at this year's ISACA conference, breaking down the opportunities but also the inbuilt limitations of modern AI and machine learning-enhanced cybersecurity. Alex punctures the myths inherent in both the utopian and the dystopian views on AI, giving you cogent and thoughtful advice on how to utilize AI in your work, your studies, and your life in an exciting but responsible way. We're really getting some interesting conversations on this one, and you absolutely don't want to miss today's episode of Cyberwork. The IT and cybersecurity job market is thriving. The Bureau of Labor Statistics predicts 377,500 new IT jobs annually. You need skill and hustle to obtain these jobs, of course, but the good news is that cybersecurity professionals can look forward to extremely competitive salaries. That's why Infosec has leveraged 20 years of industry experience, drawing from multiple sources to give you, Cyberwork listeners, an analysis of the most popular and top-paying industry certifications. You can use it to navigate your way to a good-paying cybersecurity career. So to get your free copy of our Cybersecurity Salary Guide ebook, just click the link in the description below. It's right there near the top, just below me. You can't miss it. Click the link in the description and download our free Cybersecurity Salary Guide ebook. Your cybersecurity journey starts here. Now, let's get the show started. Welcome to this week's episode of the Cyberwork Podcast. My guests are a cross-section of cybersecurity industry thought leaders, and our goal is to help you learn about cybersecurity trends and how those trends affect the work of InfoSec professionals, and we'll leave you with some tips and advice for breaking in or moving up the ladder in the cybersecurity industry. My guest today, Alex Sharpe, is a longtime 30-year cybersecurity governance and digital transformation expert with real-world operational experience. Mr. Sharpe has run business units and has influenced national policy. He has spent much of his career helping corporations and government agencies create value while mitigating cyber risk. This gives him a pragmatic understanding of the delicate balance between business realities, cybersecurity, and operational effectiveness. He began his career at NSA, moving into the management consulting ranks, building practices at Booz Allen and KPMG. Those are two clients of ours as well. He subsequently co-founded two firms with successful exits. He has participated in almost 30 M&A transactions, and he has delivered to clients in over 25 countries on 6 continents. And so I wanted to just sort of let people know I met Alex at this year's ISACA conference, and we had a great time talking and had some good conversations since then. And so today Alex is going to be talking about some of the stuff he talked about in his presentation, which was some of the benefits and some of the limits of AI. I thought it was a really level-headed approach to the subject, and I'm looking forward to having y'all hear his insights as well. So Alex, thank you so much for joining me today, and welcome to Cyberwork.
Well, thank you for having me, Chris. I'm pretty excited. I love this topic, and I'll take any opportunity to talk about it and compare notes.
Yeah, it was definitely apparent. It was one of the most fun presentations at ISACA this year, and I was like, okay, we definitely need to exchange business cards here. So I wanted to let our listeners know about how I learned about you. Like I said, you did a presentation called "The CISO's Role in Driving Trust and the Safety and Security of AI" at this year's In Pursuit of Digital Trust conference, ISACA. So along with its stated objective, which was discussing the CISO's role in the adoption of AI and ensuring the safety of the same, Alex's presentation was a pretty even-handed look, I thought, at what AI realistically can and cannot do, and what it will and will not be able to change and transform over the coming years. So as you said on one of your opening slides, and as I said in the intro, you've been in cybersecurity business for 30 plus years and in digital transformation for 25 of those years. So what got you first excited about computers and security and tech, and how far back does your excitement for tech and securing things go, and where did it originate?
Oh, it's in my DNA.
Yeah.
I don't know. It might have been, my mother used to say I was born asking for a puppy. And I think came with that was a love of technology. I don't know what it is, but I've always gravitated towards what we now call STEM. Watched all the sci-fi movies, the really good ones and the really wacky ones. I love them all. And
I agree.
Over time, kind of evolving into the just the way the world works, you learn that human productivity is actually driven by technology, right? and how we define technology changes and evolves. At one point, probably the most valuable technologist in the cave was the person who could create fire.
Yeah, for sure.
We've evolved past that, right? And now it's supercomputers and semiconductors and software and, it's quantum. You throw out all the things you see in the media. So the general trends don't change. It's what the specific technology is.
Yeah, it's always tools and human extension. I guess when you think of it like that, like from fire onward, it's always what can we do to sort of augment ourselves in a way that sort of pushes things forward in whatever sort of stated goal we have.
Yeah, and we'll get into that a little more in a second. But all human productivity is driven by changes in technology. It turns out over the past couple hundred years, human productivity increases by roughly 3% a year. 1% of that is just sheer human growth. The rest is from technology. But for the most part, technology just shifts what work is done. And it also changes the flow of work because it gives us new ways to operate and all. And, I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more. The way AI is disrupting is different than what we usually see.
Yeah.
And that's causing, some
it's
different type of ripples.
Not quite the same thing as buggy salesman feeling the hurt when cars came out, kind of thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? And there's always unintended consequences, good and bad.
Yep.
When we started moving automobiles, we are putting carbon into the atmosphere, but our water supplies are healthier because we don't have to deal with the residuals that the horses leave in the street every day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I still remember what a crisis it was in the 80s, like the paper, the environmental issues of paper and how much less paper, how many less things are on books and whatever, and all the trees, I gotta save all the trees and stuff. And it's like, yeah, a lot less paper now all of a sudden.
Well, yeah. And you also go back to fluorocarbons. I actually do some talks on this. If you look at like fluorocarbons, right? When fluorocarbons came out, air conditioning, aerosols, everything. And then we found out that they're actually hurting the environment, right?
Yep.
We had this major leap forward. We go, right?
Yeah.
But we responded.
Yeah.
Right? And that's another thing that happens with humans. We tend to respond. If you look at, say, the Second World War with, nuclear weapons, it really is incredible, knock on wood, that we haven't killed ourselves.
Boy, howdy.
Right?
Yeah, for real. Yeah, well, let's get into that. Well, first, let's get into to you a little bit first here, Alex. So your security bona fides do indeed go back to the mid '80s when you were a cybersecurity professional, program manager, and systems engineer for the NSA.
Yep.
You worked for several organizations with full P&L responsibility as well as teaching and mentorship roles. But primarily, you've worked as a consultant under the title Sharpe Management Consulting. So, people always ask about this, but security in the mid '80s had a lot different things to do from security now. So I usually ask that question, how has it changed? But I'll ask, I'm curious if there's anything about how security was done back then that's surprisingly similar now.
Well, I'm glad you went there, right? Because it's both. And I was actually talking to a client who's a good friend turned into a good friend over the weekend. A lot of things that were like nascent and talked about and of a lot of interest when I first started have now arced over and they're popular again. I guess it's kind of like vintage clothing. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the similarities are striking, right? The fundamental principles have not changed. The domains in it haven't changed. Believe it or not, many of the players haven't changed. What we are really dealing with is a major complexity of scale. We have lost the hard outer perimeter because a lot of the security architectures that we're still trying to work with are based on the castle and moat strategy, right? You take all of our valuable stuff, we put it in one place, we build these tight walls around it, we protect it with guards and guns and access control systems.
For sure.
And then we have these strange people down at the end of the hall, these IT folks, We don't really know what they do, but we know if we give them some pizza and ask them questions, things happen, right?
Yes. Sometimes they come in and yell at us, but other than that, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the jokes from the business folks is quite often when an IT person is yelling at them, they don't know what they're being yelled at for. They don't understand it. So
Right.
it's kind of okay. You just kind of expect it. But because of the changes and the changes of scale, and now it's a business problem, which I think is the number one difference that's there, is it's a business problem. We need to move from a thought, and this is probably one of the top 3 changes from the 80s. It's no longer a technology problem with a technology solution. It's a business reality, right? So the question is, it's no longer what technical defenses do we put up to protect these well-defined assets. It's how do we protect the business? And that involves technology, people, process, organization. It's a very different world. So even within that domain, the fundamental principles have not changed. They really haven't. But that's changed. The other thing that's changed, so we lost the outer perimeter. We got a business focus now, which is great.
Right.
And most traditional cyber people are struggling with that, whether they realize it or not. And then lastly, and I think this is something that we don't talk about enough, cyber has become a business. Product vendors, consultants, advisors, right? We can go right down the list. It's become a business for them. And it's also a business for the adversary.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Right, for sure.
Look at the folks that, if you ever have the ability to look at some of the dark web reports and all, they run the ransomware campaigns and all this like a business.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's like a bizarro world Amazon over there. Yeah. So I had Lily Infante on, who was, one of the people who helped take down Lazarus Group, and she said basically they have like 24-hour customer support and one click shopping. It's ruthlessly efficient. Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. It's kind of scary to look at some of that stuff. One of my buddies does a lot of deep web, and dark web researching, and he was showing me some of the stuff they found about their innovations and discussion groups on how do we use AI to reduce our costs, right?
Yeah, right.
How do we improve our hit rate? How do we reduce our costs? It's funny.
It's wild. Yeah, no, for sure. I want to talk, drill deep into AI and how we're talking about it and how they were talking about it at ISACA this year, because I think we can agree that was over 50% of the presentations had AI in the title, So I get the sense, based on reactions to AI, and they're all over the place, from utopian glee to dystopian panic, that not everyone who's thinking about what AI is and what it will mean for the future and what it means for the present necessarily has all the facts about what AI realistically is and what it is not, and possibly what it can't likely ever be. So can you start by talking about some of the most common misconceptions about AI? And I don't mean just in terms of Skynet or HAL 9000 or Colossus versus Guardian, it's an oldie but a goodie, but in terms of full automation, human obscurity, full mechanical reproduction of human cognitive function, etc., which are all things that people seem to think are on the table. Like, what are people mostly getting right, and what do you think they're getting really wrong?
Okay, so a little bit of a story there about the AI stuff. I think there's something we can't forget, and I think it's very, very important, right?
Okay.
What we call AI today is really, the basic concepts predate the U.S. Civil War, and that'll take some time to get your head around.
Yeah.
One of the pioneers in that space is actually a woman by the name of Ada Lovelace. And when the Department of Defense in the 90s created an object-oriented language, they were trying to name it after her. And, they quickly learned that creating their own language is not a good idea. So they funded research on a lot of others, which basis up today. But it goes back a long time. And the core concepts of artificial intelligence, as we know them today, were actually Alan Turing. So if you ever watched The Imitation Game, the movie's named after his paper about what we now call AI. And the name came back about 7 years later at Stanford University. And the reason I bring that up is because what people often forget is artificial intelligence, by definition, is designed to mimic, and that's a very important word, mimic human behavior, right? And we fall under the impression that this stuff is actually thinking and reasoning.
Right.
And I can give you some examples where some educated people did some silly things. Like a person I trained with at the gym, she actually uploaded a paragraph on what she wanted from a car and said, what car should I buy? And then went on a test drove all the cars that ChatGPT recommended and wanted to know why none of them made sense for her. Okay, because it's not reasoning, right?
Yes.
I know somebody did something else like that with their medical records.
Yeah.
Then I proceeded to inform them that the moment that they uploaded those medical records, that they were now out of her control and anybody can get to them. And she proceeded to argue with me. It's like, no. Right. Yeah. So number one thing we can't forget is these tools are designed to mimic human behavior. Mimic. And that's very, very important. We also can't forget that we are in, even though we've seen a lot of advances, we are still in the very early stages of all this.
Oh, yeah.
Even though we've been using the tools for quite some time, right? I had a client ask, what are the 3 safest AI-based applications that they should put in their enterprise? And I said, Grammarly, the weather app on your phone, and Waze.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, what AI apps? Those are all AI-based apps.
Right.
So we forget that in a lot of ways we're using this all the time. We also forget that when we use things like Sirius and, all the talking stuff, that is some of the oldest AI technologies we have today. That was some of the original funding that came out of ARPA for Alan Turing back in the 50s. It was all driven by guess who? Defense and the intelligence community, right? And now it's made mainstream, right? It's gone tactical to practical, right? We're going to see more of that. So these things are mimicking human behavior. They're not doing human behavior. Second thing to remember, it's a paraphrase quote from the head of DARPA. When things with AI go bad, they go bad in ways that human never would. And a lot of that is because we forget it's mimicking human behavior. It's not actually performing human behavior. And we see that constantly, and we don't have enough time now, but some of the stuff is very funny. Some of the stuff is very serious.
This is kind of what they refer to as hallucinations. Is that?
Hallucinations.
Or is that a little different?
Hallucinations is part of it. Let me give you an example. There was a thing out there, it used to be called the rubber ducky study. I can't find it anymore, probably because it's been Googled too many times. So before AI got popular, it was out there all the time. They built a model, filled it full of data. We said, hey, we're going to give you images of rubber duckies. You figure out what a rubber ducky is. So you could give this thing a picture of a rubber ducky day in and day out. It would pull out the rubber duckies, no matter how obscure it was. One day a scientist said, oh, let's take this picture and turn it on an angle. Fed it to the machine. The machine said, it's an ostrich or whatever.
Yeah.
Because they had never trained it on a picture of a rubber ducky on an angle. It had never seen it before.
Yes.
It didn't know what to do. Sometimes the joke is it lost its little mind or it ran home to mama.
Yeah.
Right. And you don't know what these things are going to do. Right. So we have to remember that we as humans go, oh, this is a rubber ducky. We look at images. Machines look at digits. Another thing that people forget is these things tend to be single use, right? Don't take, kind of like my example before, just because it's good at one thing doesn't mean it's good at everything.
Sure.
Right. And anytime you use this stuff, understand and presume something's going to go wrong. It's just going to go wrong. It's a learning opportunity. It's great, but be smart about it. So when it goes wrong, it's not going to hurt you too bad. Yeah. Don't upload your personal sensitive information, like your social security number.
Yeah.
Things like
that is the world's biggest "you are the product" piece of machinery going right now, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think people really realize that. I think they think it's a scratch pad that's going to like talk back to them or something. I don't know.
I've seen it time and time again, and I saw this when some social media first came out. There was a tendency of believing, oh, this is a really bad idea in the analog world, but it must be fine if I put it on someplace that 9 billion people can get to it.
Sure.
Right? For some reason, the change in tools, maybe because it's a lack of understanding or whatever, but it's a bad idea.
Or just thinking things through to the end points or whatever in favor of, what the next cool thing is going to be about it. But, I guess I want to jump from that to, sort of the focus of your consulting. Like, can you tell me about some of the things that CISOs need to understand about these issues around AI and how to manage the risk inherent in these types of AI implementations? This is, we want to tie it back to kind of job roles. And, we've been talking the last couple of weeks, CISOs are, pretty stressed right now, and there's a lot of when things go wrong, there's a lot of finger pointing, there's a lot of shadow firing if you're on call when the breach event inevitably happens or whatever. But this is just one more thing. It's like, how do I add this really volatile thing to our existing stack? Do you have any sort of general suggestions on that?
Oh man, there's a couple of things. So I spend a fair amount of time on this, and I can honestly say that every time I have a conversation, the thinking evolves. But with that said, the absolute number one thing that we have to remember is we still need to do the top two things, right? It's a technology problem without a technology solution.
Yep.
Right? It requires people, process, technology, and organization. It also requires the basic blocking and tackling. And if any of your audience members reach out, I've done a couple of articles on this, and the presentation you attended was specifically on it. I'd be more than willing to share with them. But it turns out that these models, so good news, bad news. When we buy these products and these models, out of the box, they are not coming with the basic blocking and tackling we're all used to.
Right.
Now, I sit on some security working groups, specifically around AI, and also some functional groups. And I also talk to a lot of CISOs and product developers. And the first thing that they will tell you is they know, that's not fair. When this subject comes up, one of the first things they'll tell you is they know there's a problem. And the reason is they know that these features and functions need to be integrated, but the models themselves are at the point where they're not stable enough and the performance isn't there. So when they turn on the security features, everything goes to crap. Right. So they know it's a problem, which I consider that to be a major leap forward as opposed to what we saw with the internet and the different versions of the web and social media. These folks know that the stuff's not in there and they need to do it. I think one of the responsibilities of a CISO, for the sake of the organizations and themselves, is to do a fair amount of myth busting.
Yes.
Now, the myth busting needs to be educating folks on how AI works, how it changes the risk equation, and how there's unique risks. So one of the things I often recommend is chief risk officer, whoever that is in your organization. We should spend some time looking at the risk register and asking ourselves, how does AI change the equation?
Yeah.
Two sides. How does it change the risk itself? But then how does it alter our ability to mitigate that risk? right? And like, there's a lot of efforts right now. There have been for quite some time. As a matter of fact, the first AI use case I worked on circa 1990 was how do we use AI to analyze logs to predict malicious incidents, or how to better find malicious incidents.
Yeah.
We're still working on that use case, but there's a lot under the term defender's dilemma. Phil Venables at Google has him and Royal Hansen have an excellent paper on it, which I highly recommend. The other thing is we need to create guardrails, right? So Europe is Europe. They dove in with regulation.
Yeah.
That's what they do. They're very good at that. The U.S. is taking a different tack. It's like, well, we don't want to stifle innovation.
Yes.
So let's look at frameworks and things to consider and guardrails and all this, and then penalize people who go too far. Okay.
Yeah.
I in principle, I'm okay with that. I mean, there's a lot of judgment calls that have to be made along the way.
Yeah.
And there has to be a lot of sensible stuff along the way. But I highly believe in guardrails. I also believe in partnerships, inside and outside, up and down the chain, left and right on the org chart, right? AI is a tremendous technology, but it's also like electricity. Not one person in the organization owns it, but everybody uses it.
Yeah.
So everybody needs to engage in a different way.
Yeah.
I highly endorse having a steering committee or a task force, that's cross-functional, preferably chartered by the board of directors, because it's a business imperative. And you also want the authority to be able to navigate and do what you need to do. I highly recommend that. I also highly recommend integrating AI into your GRC practices, kind of like we talked about before.
Yes.
Let's go down the list of our risk register and say, how does this change things, right? Does it introduce new risks? Does it inflame others? Does it provide us a different vehicle for mitigation? What does it do?
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot there, but again, if your viewers reach out, I'm more than happy to share presentations and papers on the subject. And I would love all the feedback they have.
Absolutely. Now, I mean, again, I'm not the expert here, so feel free to tell me if I'm off here. But I mean, even if you know a little bit about what all this stuff is, it's still at its core, it's a very, 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 very high level set of calculating devices. So like the things that you want it to do have to have sort of a calculation aspect. So I think you're right. Government risk compliance is like a really good, like, these are all of the different potential things you can do, and I am going to calculate all of the different possibilities and so forth. And I think that's interesting, because I hear log analysis as being one of the things people always say, like, oh, it's gonna revolutionize that. Of course you'll need a human on the back end of it to sort of like interpret what it said or whatever, but it's still a calculation device.
30 years later, we're still working on it.
Okay. Tell me
tell
me what's happening in that right now then.
Well, let me tell you two things.
Okay.
First of all, when I saw over the years, I've still seen large vendors still working on it, right? And because we compute differently, we can compute more data, we have more data, we know more about what's going on, right? It's more prevalent. There's a lot of reasons why it's more viable today than it was 3 decades ago, right? Biggest issue that I see is now we no longer have logs all in one places. We have them dispersed amongst an enterprise, right?
Sure.
And we're getting better at how to correlate that. Just simple things like having everybody on the same date timestamp makes a huge difference in correlating log file. It's really kind of, it's again one of those little knucklehead things you go, oh yeah, we should really do that. Cool.
This does change everything.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I should have had a V8. It happens. But what we're seeing is we're seeing that AI is doing exactly what we thought it would do. it's not popping up with a magic answer.
Mm-hmm.
It's saying, out of all of this, here's the 5 or 10 places you need to look.
Exactly. Yes.
And here's why. And that's a tremendous advantage.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
huge.
Yeah, that's a time saver supreme. You know, I mean, it really is the thing that, you know, like people say, oh, it's going to take away this or that or whatever. But like, yeah, that is drudge work that nobody needs, man. Just going through.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
You know, it's just simple stuff. And you know, you talk about math. Let's go there for a second. Huge amounts of advances in autonomous vehicles, right? But when you look at these models and how they're operating, they are incredibly intricate. We don't know how to inspect them. We know they're constantly changing. And again, when they do silly things, we go, what happened? Right? So there was an incident that was shared with me, autonomous vehicle. This autonomous vehicle all the time came along and stopped at the stop sign, right? We as humans, we see a stop sign, we see an 8-figure, you know, octagon painted red, white letters. We see that. Machines see ones and zeros. Well, one day the autonomous vehicle comes up and just goes right by it. And what was relayed to me was kids were putting stickers on this.
Yeah.
This, right?
Sure.
But what happened is we thought, you know, the humans are looking at this going, well, that's a stop sign with stickers. And the machine says, no, I'm looking at this little spot over here.
This is either a stop sign or it's not a stop sign. And there's just not enough evidence that it's a stop sign. Yeah.
Exactly. And we forget that a lot of times. We also forget that, especially with images. I don't know if I showed. Yeah, I probably did in my present. It's one of my favorite things where you can actually like put filtering on top of the image that the
data poisoning, right?
Yep. Yep. And it fits in an overall area called steganography, which is how you can hide messages, right? So the machines themselves will see something that you don't, and it's doing exactly what it thinks it was told. Right? And, you know, so
I mean, just as an example, you showed the same picture of like a dog 3 times, and the computer had seen it as like a dog, an ostrich, and a lamppost or something like that. Yeah. And it was because, like you said, there was those sort of like hidden sort of message or hidden image elements that human eye doesn't see that the computer can only see.
Yeah. So it fails in ways that humans never would, and also people can screw with it intentionally or, you know, or benign.
Right. Which I think is another thing that no one really talks about, is that, you know, a lot of this stuff is being tested with the idea that everyone is going to be sort of have the same sort of, you know, positive intentions for things like that. You know, that, you know, well, clearly everyone's going to give it the best data it could possibly have, you know?
Well, yeah. So let's go there for a second. One of the things I've learned in working stuff over the years, data scientists, and I'm not picking on data scientists, I'm just going to talk about realities. They tend to be some of the most highly privileged users in an organization.
Yes.
Right? So they blow away the concept of least privilege, role-based this and that, access control, you know, that tends not to apply to them.
Yeah.
Right? When it comes to awareness and training, they also tend to be the ones that are least likely to believe somebody wants to screw with their data, right? They have spent 6, 12, 18 months getting this data right. Why would anybody not put my data, right? So that's part of what we're talking about before, about the myth busting and the raising awareness. Now, in all fairness, if you look at what we've done to our data scientists, right, they spend most of their time cleaning up data and garbage collecting and stuff like that. Because the rise in data, the volume of data, and the expectations on data have gone through the roof. But for us as, you know, security professionals, we still need to work with these folks and, you know, get them to be on our side. And frankly, you know, think a bit like a crook.
Yeah. Oh yeah, completely. So okay, well, I want to go from that to a couple things, but let's start here. So one of the themes that came up a lot in the conference in ISACA was someone said, quote, AI will not replace humans, but AI proficient humans will replace non-AI proficient humans, which I guess is a little less scary, but it's kind of a curious statement. And so for listeners who are studying, I mean, and again, this is, a lot of our listeners are students or becoming security professionals and so forth, people who are trying to sort of make their way in from other industries, like, what additional learning should they be taking on with whatever they're learning to ensure that their skill sets are also making them, AI proficient humans regardless of their sort of specialization?
Well, the short answer is most of what the impact we're going to see from AI, we're not going to consciously see from AI. Because you think about it, when we look at artificial intelligence, it's already integrating our lives in ways that we don't even understand, in ways we don't realize it, right? You pick up your smartphone, guess what? Yeah. I'm 98% sure every day you use at least one AI-enabled app.
Oh, yeah.
If you have a home security system or use any video, they're all AI-enabled right now, right? It's embedded in so much. Oh, your car. Cars, not necessarily autonomous driving, but it's all over the place, right?
Yeah.
So most of what we deal with AI is we're already using it and it's totally transparent to us. Now, with that said, understanding that this is an evolving field, and probably the number one thing to understand with an evolving field is good ideas are usually behind a few bad ones.
Okay.
Basic principle of innovation, pioneered ironically by an economist called Joseph Schumpeter 150 years ago. It turns out to be true today. But Thomas Edison is probably the most referenced person in this area.
Okay.
He talked about innovation being 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. It took him something like 1,500 tries to get the filament right on a light bulb.
Yeah.
Right. So dive in, play with it, explore it. Things aren't going to go right. Learn, plow it forward, wash, rinse, repeat. That's probably the number one thing to go with. Yeah. The second
and the guardrails are sort of protect against the colossally bad ideas that have to happen first to allow the good ideas to seep through in the back.
Yeah, if you want something to do some auto sensing, probably your oxygen supply would not be a good place to start, right?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not, or you don't know if something's going to work.
Water supply. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. If you got a new device of some sort, trying it on the family pet's probably not a good first stop, right? No. Not good ideas, right? So you watch the guardrails. If you're a security professional, I highly, highly, highly recommend watching a couple of things. One is the Defender's Dilemma, which I mentioned a minute ago. CISO or Google, a guy by the name of Phil Venables. He and Royal Hansen, who's a VP of architecture for him, they have a really nice paper. If you can't, you should be able to Google, find it. Lots of great ideas.
Yeah.
Watch the product vendors about what they're talking about. Whether it's real or not is another story.
Yes.
Right? But for lack of a better term, fiction always leads the way, right? We saw this with Star Trek and Star Wars, and you pick a movie. By the way, you War Games, right?
Yep.
2001: Space Odyssey. There's tons and tons of stuff out there, right?
Sure.
These are usually good ideas that are inspirational. They're good down the road. So the paper, watch what the product vendors are doing, whether it's real or not. It's fantastic ideas, wonderful ideas. There's tons and tons of webinars.
Okay.
And I would spend time on the ones that come from, let's say, reputable organizations.
Okay.
Universities generally have a data science organization, right? So I'm a member of the one from Columbia, have been for years, and it's amazing some of the stuff that they're looking at. If you're interested in specific field, the research centers or the hospitals, the large hospitals, like for example, prior to COVID, right? Because AI is so new, it's been around for decades.
Yeah.
Prior to COVID, a handful of the major cancer hospitals got together and talked about how they were using AI for cancer research, right? Those are all excellent ways of keeping abreast. Even if some of it's a sales pitch, it's very, it's generating really good ideas.
Yes.
And it's educational, and you get to decide what you like, and you can toss away the rest.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about that from maybe a less tech-heavy version. Because I think you're right. A CISO has to act as a mythbuster, but I think we all have to kind of act as mythbusters as we go ahead with this kind of thing. So, and I think a lot of us have the anxiety of, maybe a work culture where AI is being treated as this is a thing that just happened yesterday and everyone needs to, ready or not, here it comes kind of thing. And so I think for people who feel it sort of like coming in and not encroaching necessarily, but becoming more ubiquitous, do you have any thoughts on any guiding principles that we should be holding on to in our day-to-day lives when we sort of decide how we're going to sort of integrate or not integrate AI in deliberate ways? I know you said that obviously our phones and our cars make it kind of inevitable anyway, but I think there's still some consumer choices that can be made here, and I'm wondering if you have any principles around that.
Oh, absolutely. So there's a couple of things. I think one of the things we need to, let me give you two things to keep in mind. If you look at how technology is historically adopted, AI is following that adoption cycle like every other technology has before it, a little bit accelerated all of a sudden. Prior to the fall of 2022, nobody was interested in a talk about AI or having AI on a resume. Now the phone doesn't stop ringing, right?
For sure, yeah.
It changes. So it follows that adoption. So understand what we're living through now, we've been through before with other major changes, electricity, the internet, the World Wide Web, fire.
Yeah.
Right? But
right.
too bad nobody was
before my time.
Nobody was recording that.
Yeah.
There is one major exception. Who it's disrupting is changing.
Okay.
So this is the first time a technology has affected white-collar workers, knowledge workers in a major way.
Yeah.
So historically, we're taking work, we're repurposing it to a machine. The work itself doesn't go away. It tends to go to the machine. But if you look at what AI is doing in the way it mimics human behavior, it's reducing the burden placed on the knowledge worker, the human who needs data and applications. If you look at like the Oxford studies or Cornell University has one, there's a few, they all talk about what's being disrupted. And that is all knowledge workers, right? Accountants, lawyers, blah, 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 blah. You can go down the list. On the other hand, we see it causing a relief in some areas like cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is plagued with two workforce problems right now. One is we have a shortage of workers, which means we have to increase productivity. The second is we have a skills mismatch, which is something we don't talk about. AI can be used to do both of them, and that's where we're seeing major investments, right? So that's there. But daily lives, remember it's disrupting in ways we've seen before. So it might be new to us, but it's not news to economists and historians.
For sure.
And technology people, people who study this stuff. It is disrupting white collar workers. So when you look at career choices and all, you would be well advised to see what's being disrupted and what's not. Right? And there's a lot of studies out there on it. And one thing that's smacks me in the face every time I look at them is how consistent they are. It's almost like they're using the same data and writing different reports.
Right.
remember with AI, it mimics human behavior. It's not really a sentient being. Now, some people will argue that we might get there.
Yeah.
Clearly not there yet.
Yeah.
Right? That's kind of dystopic. I would much rather think those movies are a cautionary tale so we don't do something silly, but we shall see. So it mimics human behavior, but it's not human behavior. And never forget, it's actually working with ones and zeros, right? And then lastly, it's a technology problem without a technology solution. Awareness and training, check your outputs, major problem, right? It hallucinates, makes up stuff. Check your outputs.
Eager to please, wants to give you an answer even if it doesn't have enough data points. I mean, can you speak to, I mean, there's people who are saying things like AI can lie, but I think it seems like that still sort of falls under the purview of it's sort of eager to please in a way that it's giving you, what it thinks you want, and it ends up sometimes looking weirdly deceptive. I mean, am I wrong on that, or?
That starts to, this is going to sound stupid, but it becomes a question of what's a lie. And I think it tends to, that question tends to beg the question, are these things thinking? No, it's not thinking. Right. So these LLMs, two factoids I heard recently from a very reputable source, is that the average LLM, when you put a query in, right, you put a prompt in, it hits on average 1,000 pages. So it distills the information from 1,000 pages to reply to your prompt. Find a place in the world where you can get 1,000 pages that agree and there's not a bad fact in there, right? It's going to be there.
Right,
The second fact I heard, which was also interesting, is that every prompt consumes about a half a liter of water in the data set, which another problem outside the scope of the show. So does this stuff lie? No. It makes a determination based on the data it's given and based on the model that interprets that data.
Yes.
So if you want to assume it lies, you'd also have to assume it's a sentient being.
Yeah. Yeah. And that it otherwise has good intentions or bad intentions or any intentions. Okay, so we've talked sort of CISO and myth busting. We've talked average public and how to sort of interact with this stuff. For listeners who are planning to go into working more directly and more thoroughly with AI, whether programming the algorithms or refining the machine learning process or creating the tools that we can bolt the AI to, or the AI we can bolt the tools to, what are some skills and degrees and certifications and experiences that they should be actively seeking now to help them be qualified for this type of career a couple years down the road?
Oh, that's not an easy question. So going back to your thing about it's an easy question. The answer hasn't figured itself out yet.
Okay.
So it's like when in the 80s, my bachelor's is in electrical engineering. The computer science program I took was part of the engineering program, right? Most computer science programs these days are standalone departments, right? So things evolve as they grow and all that. A lot of it comes down to right now, the number one thing to do is become a sponge and understand how this stuff works, recognizing when we say AI, there's actually a family underneath that.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
A large language model is different, right? We could start going through it.
Yes.
But there's all these different pieces and they all work differently. Anything you could do to just absorb as much as possible. So but from credible sources. The universities, as a general rule, do a really good job at talking about how these models work. Google has a lot of good classes. They really do. One thing you have to look at when you deal with the universities is if you get a class from a math department, it'll be much more math heavy. as opposed to if you go to the data analytics group.
Right.
So be a little cautious of that. I think for anybody in the security business, taking some of the classes from ISACA on how to audit these models is a great idea. Follow what NIST is doing, NIST,
Yes.
and what we're seeing out of the European Union. That'll help you understand what are the critical areas and what dials are going to need to be turned.
Right.
Unfortunately, there is not one good source for ideas.
Yes.
We don't have a consistent taxonomy. So we have different terms for the same thing. I actually sit on a very senior level AI group, and we joke that we all agree in principle, but we can't figure out what words to use.
Yeah. So this isn't usually around this time I ask, guests if they had a magic gavel, what kind of legislation would they put in place, or this, that, and the other thing. But we've already bonded a lot on classic sci-fi and speculative fiction and so forth. If you had a magic wand that allowed you to sway the direction that AI is going to be used and adopted over the, say, next 20 to 50 years, what are some principles that you would like to introduce into the thinking that would make its long-term evolution less fraught?
All right. The number one thing is we need guardrails, not regulation at this point. Absolute number one thing, because we need to evolve, which means we have to fail, we have to learn, we have to integrate our learnings, wash, rinse, repeat. We also need heavy investment in private-public partnerships. So private companies have a different set of priorities. They can only take on projects of a certain size. They only have an influence of a certain size. But let's say all the the US and its allies got together globally and said, we're going to make major investments in AI. It will accelerate a lot faster than if we rely on a pile of individual organizations. Don't get me wrong. Private investment is incredibly important. But the larger, longer term, higher risk really has to be invested in by the government. So let's talk about the internet.
Please.
Right? We never would have had the internet without public-private partnerships.
For sure. And
the internet funded everything after that. It became the foundation for everything afterward, including what we're talking about. So private-public partnerships, creating the guardrails, I think that's incredibly important. I also think that we need to encourage the use of all these horrible movies and the bad things that happen as a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
But not forget, there's a lot of good stuff. Look at Star Trek. Look at Star Wars, right? You talk about coexisting with AI, that is all over the place in there, right? Right? How many times did R2-D2 as an autonomous vehicle or even C-3PO, how many people did they save as autonomous vehicles? Right? But we don't talk about that.
That's true.
Right? So, use it as a cautionary tale, which is a good thing, because we as humans, when we know what to be concerned about, we watch out for it. Sometimes the pendulum swings too far, but it's better than not having it.
Yeah.
So
and also realize that it's a lot of times not written by people with immense scientific knowledge. They're not predicting. What Ray Bradbury say, I'm not trying to predict the future. I'm trying to prevent the future. And it's
One of my favorite is he's like, well, scientists told him you can't create a transporter. Like, why? So there's this uncertainty principle and all this. So oh crap, what does he do? He comes in the next day and says, we're going to create a Heisenberg compensator. What does a Heisenberg compensator do? It compensates for the uncertainty principle. How does it work? I don't know. We have 500 years to figure it out. Right?
Yeah, right. Fabulous.
Right?
That's how you start thinking about it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you start unreasonable and then work your way towards reasonability, I suppose. Why not?
Learn.
Yeah.
He happened on the moon long before we did.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. All right. Well, then, going back to sort of practical things, because we're coming up on the hour here, Alex, I could talk to you for 3 more hours, but this has been a blast. But before I go, I got to ask, what's the best piece of career advice you ever received?
All right. The best piece of career advice I received was from a very senior executive very early in my career. And I think it applies to what we're talking about. They told me to understand that sometimes the only way you know you're doing a good job is by who you're pissing off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Innovation, disruption is unsettling. It turns out only 1 out of 20 people will grab onto it and find it exciting, right? I happen to be one of the strange ones.
Mm-hmm.
So that means 19 people out of 20 are going to be a little unsettled about what you're doing, right? So accept the fact that that's going to happen. But that also goes back to why you want to build these relationships, right? Because if people know you're not trying to hurt them and they can understand where they fit and how they can leverage it to their advantage, and that you're a nice person, not out to get them, things go a whole lot better, and they start to becoming part of the solution instead of your roadblock.
Yeah.
So, best piece of advice I ever received, and some of the funniest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's fantastic, and yeah, I think and it also speaks to just the need for because I think a lot of people there's certainly enough evidence that there's a lot of clinical psychopaths in upper level echelons and so forth, but I think a lot of them sort of glom onto that first half and don't glom onto the second half. Like you're no one until you have haters, but also hey, maybe trying to explain what you're doing so that you're not the bad guy might be good as well, and so you don't end up having the Imperial March playing behind you every time you make a decision.
Well, the reality is you're going to have a certain percentage of the people that are against whatever you're doing for whatever reason. Most of the reasons have nothing to do with you or the actual activity. You might as well just narrow them down. So because your job at the end of the day is still to move the ball forward.
Yeah.
Right. So the more obstacles you can move out of your way and the more people you can get helping you push the ball, the better off you're going to be, just recognizing, the world's not perfect.
Yeah. And we got to keep moving. So, all right. Well, like I say, just about time to wrap up, but feel free if you want to tell our listeners more about Sharpe Management Consulting and the work you do there. Here's a chance.
All right, cool. So really simple. I'm easy to find. It's Sharpe with an E, SHARPE. The website is Sharpe LLC for Limited Liability Corporation. You can easily find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out. Basically, the work these days is I've pulled it back to just being me, and I'm really loving advising and consulting to organizations and policymakers, largely around cybersecurity, resilience, AI, the stuff we're talking about. So feel free to connect and reach out. My tagline is value creation while mitigating cyber risk, because the idea is the world has gone digital. And the reason cyber exists is to enable the world to continue on its digital path, its AI path, but doing it without killing ourselves or presenting too much risk.
Yeah, beautiful. All right, well, you answered all my questions. Thank you so much for your time and insights, Alex. This has been so much fun. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.